Well, hello! The wait is finally over. The new ISO 14001-2026 Environmental Management System standard has been released. And if you are certified or planning to get certified, then you're gonna wanna listen to this video and learn about the changes. This revision is not just minor wording changes. It is actually pushing environmental management systems to become more integrated with business strategy, more data-driven, and much more control when it comes to change. So in this video, I'm going to give you a clear, high-level overview of what actually changed based on our full comparison analysis so that you can understand what it means for you. Now, before we get started on the macro trends, I want to talk to you about the transition timeline. If you are wondering how much time you have to transition to this new version, well, the ISO website says 3 years, but to check with your registrar. So that is the general rule. All standards, when they have been upgraded, they usually will give you 3 years. In this case, it means since the standard was released in April 2026, then it will be obsoleted by April 2029. However, you will be able to continue having your external audits or registrar audits to the 2015 version for a period of time until you migrate. So you have 3 years to migrate, and probably your external audits will continue to be to the 2015 version for a period of time. And that could be 1 year, 2 years, or even close to the 3-year deadline, subject to your registrar. That's what ISO says, contact your registrar, because every registrar may have their own rules. You might have a registrar that may only give you 2 years to migrate, and they will say that by the 3rd year, you should already be having your external audit to the new version. And the reason why is because if you fail, like if you have several non-conformities, and it takes a while for you to resolve them and for them to approve them, you could become out of compliance if that deadline go by. And so they have maybe a year or 6 months of a buffer. If you are a new registrant, if you're going for certification for the first time, it's the same thing. The registrar may only have 1 more year where they will accept applications for the old 2015 versions, and then maybe next year they will start with the new version. But again, depending on the registrar that you have chosen or the one that you will choose, then they will have the details for either your first-time certification or for your migration. So let's get started with the big picture or the macro trends in the changes of the standard. When we analyze this new version, a few clear patterns show up across multiple clauses. First of all, there's a shift from a standard to document. Now, this aligns ISO 14001 with the broader ISO harmonization efforts. And although this sounds small, it reflects a bigger push towards consistency across all standards. Now, the other big trend was that we're moving away from the words maintain, retain, to available documented information. This is one of the most repeated changes found in 15 places in the standard. So instead of focusing on storing documents or controlling records or maintaining or retaining, the focus is now on making information available and usable. Less bureaucracy, but more usability. And this is of course great in the era where everything is digital and where everything should be available. If your procedure is wonderful, but it doesn't represent reality and people cannot find it, then there's moot point. All right, and the last big trend here is that there is the use of simpler, more business-friendly language. You will see changes like fulfill has become now meet compliance obligations. And this just to make things easier to understand, because maybe in different languages this won't translate well, or maybe just to make it more readily understood. Now, outputs have become results, such as in the management review outputs. I really like this because we have had clients where they don't understand what we mean by management review outputs, because that outputs gives you the idea of something being tangible, and having results is actually more of something that can potentially be intangible. So this is ISO trying to speak the language of business, not just compliance language, something that can be more easily understood. We also see here some structural changes. There's a few important shifts, like risk and opportunities was repositioned as its own clause rather than being part of general. And by making it part of its own clause 6.1.4 after other clauses like aspects or compliance obligations, then it's better suited because you are supposed to identify risk and opportunities on all those other areas. So it should come after. Now, another structural change, but this is really a new requirement, is the brand new clause 6.3 planning of changes. This is amazing. Before, the ISO 14001 standard barely had one sentence about change, so a very good welcome change. Now, clause 10 was actually reorganized to give more relevancy to the continual improvement aspects of the standard. These are all welcome changes that can make the standard flow better, and so that you can understand it better also when you implement it. But most importantly, it will integrate better if you are actually implementing other standards like ISO 9001 or ISO 45001. And the last trend that we have is that there is a stronger integration with business. This is probably one of the biggest themes of these changes, is that the environmental management system should no longer exist in silo. It is expected to be part of how your business runs. All right, so those were the trends and what we see across several clauses of the standard. Now, let's look at some of the most important changes. And of course, the first one is going to be the planning of changes 6.3. In these requirements, organizations are expected to plan the changes affecting their environmental management system, to control those changes, and also to evaluate their effectiveness. This is essentially introducing management of change expectation into ISO 14001. So if you didn't have a structured way to manage your changes, well, guess what? Now you're gonna have to. Think about changing your chemical suppliers. Maybe before you were like, great, let's do it. Well, guess what? Now you might have to identify what actions are going to be in place, what are the potential risks, and then if the change was approved, then you might have to verify that everything was done as per the plan. So no more just flying by the seat of your pants. Now you have to plan the change. For the clients that we have helped get certified, we always try to help them put some kind of management of change in place, even if it was simple. So now this is going to be better because they are going to have to put a good management of change program in place. And of course, for our web QMS clients, we have the almighty MOC app that will help them on this. Now, another important change was just that there was a clarification on risk and opportunity. The word threats is gone, but risk now has its own section, making this requirement more enforceable and less confusing with aspect. This makes risk management more consistent with other standards like ISO 9001, and thus making it easier to integrate also with other business processes. Now, one of the other important changes here is in environmental aspects. The change is subtle, but you're now expected to more clearly consider normal operating condition, not just abnormal, emergency situation, and a life cycle perspective. The life cycle means when you are looking into your normal or abnormal conditions or emergency situations, you should not just look at one process, but rather processes from the beginning of your scope to the end, and including even use and disposal. So for example, if you look at your main process map and you see your core processes, and everything starts when somebody puts an order, and then of course you have ordering of material and design and production, also delivery. Well, you also have to consider use and disposal, all on the life cycle of your services, activities, and products. So a life cycle perspective is needed when determining your environmental aspects. Another important change here is the external providers versus outsourcing. So the word outsourcing is now gone and has been replaced with the words externally provided processes, products, and services. This aligns directly with ISO 9001 and forces a more comprehensive view of what you can control or what you can influence. So the idea is not just to replace the words, but actually to make you understand that in your environmental management system, you have control and you may influence some of these externally provided processes, products, and services. And the more you can control and influence in regards to the environment, well, then of course it's going to benefit the world. Now, another important change here is about performance evaluation. Now, of course, this was already in place, but then the words were reshuffled, repositioned, so that there is explicit call for analysis of data, or monitoring, measurement, and analysis. In other words, we're not just going to collect data, but we're also going to analyze it so that we can make informed decisions. All right, and now we are on the last part of our summary of changes, and these have to do with other important changes that you should pay attention to and not ignore. So we have a bit of side changes to the climate change. And if you remember, the standard had an amendment to consider climate change as an issue. And it was almost like in your face, you had to do it. Well, guess what? Now it is just not the start of the show. It's part of a broader list of environmental conditions that you should consider as part of your issues. So ISO is kind of avoiding being overly prescriptive on this, but not really removing the expectation that you will consider climate change. However, it's not just single out. There's more that you need to consider. Now, the interested parties also is another good change where you are supposed to look into what their needs are and which of those needs are you going to do something about. So kind of was there before, but maybe not necessarily enforceable, while now you may be challenged to answer why you pick some of these needs to do something about it versus not doing anything about them. And of course, there is the emphasis on the life cycle control, which we talked about before, and that just has to do with looking at the big picture. When you look at your main process map, and hopefully you have one where you can look at your processes and identify what is part of your environmental management system. But when you look at that, it should include, for example, the design phase, if that is something you do. Basically, more of the upstream environmental impact rather than just focusing on operations. What else is before or after that will give you a good perspective on the life cycle of your processes, products, or services. So, what do you think about all these changes? Hopefully this short summary will help you see how ISO 14001:2026 is pushing organizations to manage environmental systems as part of their businesses and make decisions based on data and analysis, and most importantly, control change in a structured way. So congratulations, you now know a little bit more about the new ISO 14001:2026 version, and hopefully you'll start thinking about what you're going to have to do to transition your environmental management system to the new standard. Now, this was just an overview. If you want to go a little deeper on these changes, we're going to be scheduling a webinar which I will leave the information in the description, and you can attend there and you will be receiving a copy of our detailed comparison analysis of the ISO 14001 2015 version versus the 2026 version. Now, if you would like to brush up on your entire ISO 14001 standard, we also have two-day implementation course where you will be able to go through every clause and see what the standard says, how you implement it, and how you audit it. And of course, this will be against the new revision of the standard. We also have a 3-day ISO 14001 internal auditor where the third day is all about auditing. And if all you want is just a little bit more help with the transition, then we also have a transition course where you not only get to understand the changes, but you also get a template for management of change, or MOC, so that you can kickstart your transition correctly. Good luck with your transition, and hope to see you maybe at the webinar or in one of our classes at Miro University.